The crazy woman. In Send Help, Linda Little seems like the definition of an unlucky person who finally deserves a win. She's a brilliant strategist who spends years carrying the company on her back, only to be ignored by her boss, Bradley Preston, a spoiled heir who gives her dream promotion to a college friend. As if that weren't enough, Linda is constantly humiliated because of her appearance and lack of charisma. It's impossible not to root for her. When a plane crash leaves Linda and Bradley stranded on a remote island, the dynamic completely changes. All of Bradley's money and status suddenly become meaningless. Now, Linda is the one who knows how to find food, build shelter, and keep both of them alive. At first, it feels like a story about justice. The arrogant man finally depends on the person he always looked down on, but Linda starts enjoying that position a little too much. Even after saving Bradley several times, she begins using his dependence as a form of punishment. After discovering that he tried to poison her so he could escape the island alone, Linda decides to get revenge in a cruel way, even temporarily paralyzing him to leave him completely at her mercy. But the real twist comes when we discover that from the very beginning, she had found a luxurious mansion hidden on the other side of the island. Instead of telling Bradley the truth, she keeps the discovery secret and continues forcing him to live in miserable conditions. The point of no return arrives when Bradley's fiancé shows up with help. Any normal person would see that as salvation. Linda sees it as a threat to her power and kills them both. After discovering what she did to his fiancé and finding the mansion, Bradley attacks her, but she kills him as well. She is eventually rescued and becomes a celebrity after returning to civilization. The most ironic part is that by the end, she becomes exactly the same selfish, status-obsessed person she hated from the very beginning. The honeymoon. In a perfect getaway, Cliff and Sydney seem like exactly the kind of couple you expect to survive until the end. The two are enjoying their honeymoon in Hawaii and set out on an isolated hiking trail leading to a beautiful beach. Along the way, reports begin circulating about a pair of killers operating on the islands, turning the trip into a giant game of suspicion. The movie does everything it can to make us see the story through their eyes. Cliff is an insecure screenwriter full of funny comments, while Sydney seems like nothing more than an ordinary tourist trying to enjoy her vacation. As they encounter other travelers along the trail, suspicion naturally falls on the other characters. One couple of backpackers behaves aggressively, while another group displays survival skills that seem straight out of an action movie. And that's exactly where the trap lies. The big twist reveals that Cliff and Sydney aren't even Cliff and Sydney. Their real names are Rocky and Cleo, two criminals who murdered the original couple and stole their identities. They took their clothes, stories, belongings, and even their vacation photos to build the perfect disguise. For almost the entire movie, we're following the real villains without realizing it. The boyfriend. In Companion, the story follows Iris, a young woman who travels with her boyfriend Josh to spend a few days at an isolated mansion alongside his friends. At first, Josh seems like the perfect partner. He's polite, charismatic, and appears genuinely in love with Iris. Since the story is mostly told from her perspective, it's natural for the audience to like him too. But that image begins to fall apart when we discover that Iris isn't an ordinary person. She's an artificial companion, created to fulfill her owner's wishes. The revelation makes it seem like the movie is going to follow the classic route of artificial intelligence becoming dangerous. But Companion completely flips that expectation. Little by little, it becomes clear that Josh never saw Iris as a partner. He controls her memories, her personality, and even the way she interprets the world around her. Everything was programmed so she could be the perfect girlfriend. From there, the story reveals an even larger conspiracy. The entire trip to billionaire Sergey's mansion was planned in order to manipulate her. Josh and his friend Kat intended to hack her systems, make her kill Sergey, and use her artificial nature as a scapegoat while they stole the fortune hidden on the property. As the plan begins to fall apart, the conspirators themselves turn against each other because of the money, while Iris starts developing consciousness and independence. The climax raises the tension even further when Patrick, another android, is reprogrammed into a relentless killing machine, forcing Iris to fight for her own survival. The most interesting thing is that the movie uses a science fiction concept to talk about something deeply human: relationships built on control. The more the truth comes out, the less Iris looks like a threat, and the more she becomes the real victim of the situation. Before we continue, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. We're getting very close to 100,000 subscribers, and I can only thank all of you for your support. The Perfect Prince. In Fresh, we meet Noah, a young woman who is completely exhausted by the disastrous dates she's had through dating apps. After a long series of strange, annoying, or simply unbearable guys, she meets Steve by chance in a grocery store, and he seems too perfect to be real. Steve is funny, polite, confident without being arrogant, and genuinely interested in Noah. While most horror movies try to scare you right away, Fresh does the opposite. For a long time, it almost feels like a romantic comedy, and that's exactly what makes the twist so effective. After only a few dates, Steve invites Noah on a weekend getaway. The proposal proposal seems impulsive but romantic. However, once they arrive at the destination, she discovers that the charming man was only a mask. His real name is Brendan, and he runs an underground operation that kidnaps women and sells parts of their bodies to wealthy clients obsessed with human flesh. The most disturbing detail is that his victims are kept alive throughout the process to ensure the meat always remains fresh, giving the movie's title a horrifying meaning. The reveal works because Steve represents a very real fear. He isn't frightening at first glance, quite the opposite. He's exactly the kind of person who inspires trust almost immediately. The movie turns the classic perfect guy into a calculating predator. One interesting detail is that the opening credits don't appear until after the reveal that Steve can't be trusted. It's almost as if Fresh is telling the audience, now the movie has really started. The mail carrier. In Werewolves Within, the story follows Finn, a forest ranger who has just arrived in the small town of Beaverfield. As soon as he gets there, he meets Cecily, the friendly local mail carrier who knows everyone and seems to be the only normal person in a community filled with strange, argumentative residents hiding countless secrets. And that's exactly where the movie sets up its biggest trick. As the townspeople begin suspecting one another following a series of mysterious attacks during a snowstorm, Cecily becomes Finn's partner throughout the investigation. She's funny, charismatic, and also serves as the protagonist's love interest. In other words, exactly the kind of character audiences usually put on their list of survivors, but the truth is very different. As the mystery unfolds, Finn discovers that several clues were manipulated to increase paranoia among the townspeople. In the end, Cecily reveals that she's actually the werewolf responsible for the attacks. More than that, she specifically chose that town because its residents were already divided. While everyone was busy fighting each other, she could act without drawing suspicion. The worst mother. In Jigsaw, Anna seems like exactly the kind of character audiences usually root for in survival stories. Trapped inside one of John Kramer's games alongside several suspicious people, Anna appears to be the only genuinely decent person there. The sympathy only grows once we learn about her personal history. According to her, her husband was responsible for the tragic death of their baby, and Anna spent years dealing with the pain and consequences of that event. Since she appears to be a devastated mother trying to move on, it's easy to believe she may have ended up there by mistake.
It was my husband's fault.
What? Why am I being punished for something that he did?
But we're talking about a movie from the Saw franchise, and there's almost always something hidden beneath the surface. Near the end, John Kramer himself reveals the truth. In reality, Anna was responsible for her son's death. Frustrated by the baby's constant crying, she caused his death and then staged the entire scene to make her husband appear guilty. Consumed by guilt for something he never did, he eventually took his own life. The cruelest detail is that even after the truth is revealed, Anna continues thinking only about herself. In the final test, she's given a chance to survive and immediately tries to eliminate the other participant, but the gun backfires and kills her instead.
He said we've got it backwards!
It's at that moment that the movie makes it clear that the woman who seemed the most human in the group was actually the most selfish of all, the kidnapper. In The Tall Man, everything begins like a typical horror movie about a desperate mother trying to get her child back. Julia lives in Cold Rock, a declining town devastated by unemployment and poverty after the local mines shut down. Over the years, several children have disappeared without a trace, and the townspeople believe a mysterious figure known as the Tall Man is responsible.
All I could think of was the tall man.
When David, the boy Julia has been raising as her son, disappears during the night, she launches into a frantic search to rescue him. At this point, the movie does exactly what it wants with the audience. It places Julia in the role of the absolute hero. She seems like a mother willing to face any danger for her child. But then the story completely turns upside down. The big reveal shows that David wasn't even her biological son. In fact, Julia was part of a secret operation created by her and her late husband to remove children from abusive households or homes with no real future. Even worse, the legend of the Tall Man was created by them to cover up the disappearances. The kidnappings were real, but the person responsible had been standing right in front of us the entire time. What's most interesting is that the movie never turns Julia into a conventional villain. She doesn't kidnap children for money or pleasure. In her mind, she was giving them a better life. That ambiguity is exactly what makes the twist so memorable. The basement secret. In Don't Breathe, Norman Nordstrom is introduced as someone who deserves all of our sympathy. He's a blind war veteran living alone in an isolated house while carrying the trauma of losing his daughter in an accident. When three young thieves break into his home to steal the money he supposedly received after his daughter's death, the situation appears simple. The intruders are the villains, and the blind old man is the victim. It's an easy choice when deciding who to root for. Rocky, Alex, and Money aren't exactly role models. They spend their days breaking into houses and looking for easy money. Rocky at least has a more understandable motivation since she dreams of escaping her troubled family, but we're still watching people invade someone's home to rob him. Naturally, many viewers end up rooting for Norman during the opening minutes, but the situation changes quickly. The moment he realizes someone has broken into his house, Norman proves he's far from helpless. Even without sight, he knows every inch of the property and turns the entire place into a giant trap. Suddenly, the thieves stop looking dangerous and become the prey. But there was something even worse. The intruders discover a secret hidden in the basement. Norman had imprisoned the woman who ran over and killed his daughter, forcing her to carry a new life as compensation for what she had done. At that moment, it becomes clear that Norman isn't simply a traumatized man seeking justice. Consumed by the pain of losing his daughter, he crossed lines that transformed his personal tragedy into something far more disturbing. The most interesting thing is that Don't Breathe never offers a perfect hero. Everyone makes questionable and deeply flawed decisions. The perfect friend. In this movie, Mae Dove Kennedy is extremely shy, socially awkward, and unable to form connections with other people. She grew up being bullied because of an eye condition and had a childhood marked by isolation. The only comfort she received came from her mother, but not in a healthy way. Instead of helping her make friends, she gave her a porcelain doll named Susie and repeated a phrase that would end up shaping her entire life. If you can't find a friend, make one. As Mae grows up, it becomes clear that she doesn't know how to connect with other people. She works as a veterinary assistant, tries to get close to others, and even experiences a few romances, but everything ends up going wrong. The problem is that her loneliness evolves into a strange obsession. Instead of seeing people as complete individuals, she begins admiring only specific parts of them. Adam's hands, Polly's neck, someone else's eyes. To Mae, nobody is perfect as a whole. When her relationships fail and her beloved doll ends up destroyed, she loses the last emotional connection she still had. That's when the turning point happens. Her mother's phrase stops being just a memory and becomes a plan. She then begins murdering several people in her life on Halloween night in order to build her own boyfriend using human body parts, and tears out her own eye to finish him. In the final scene, the doll-like figure still caresses her face, making everything even more bizarre. The Wish. In Obsession, Bear is introduced as that typical protagonist audiences usually root for without thinking twice. He's shy, insecure, struggles with relationships, and secretly has a crush on Nikki, his co-worker. Everything seems to point toward another story where the underdog finally gets the girl of his dreams, but the movie uses that exact expectation against the audience. After finding a supernatural object called the One Wish Willow, Bear makes a wish that completely changes the story. Instead of wishing for a chance with Nikki, he wishes that she would love him more than anyone else in the world. It sounds romantic at first, but the intention behind it is far more disturbing. He doesn't want to win Nikki over. He wants to make sure she belongs to him. When the wish comes true, Nikki begins acting strangely, repeating phrases and displaying an obsession that is clearly unnatural.
Oh, no, don't do that!
The most interesting part is that Bear realizes something is wrong, but instead of trying to help her, he chooses to ignore all the warning signs because he's finally living the fantasy he's always wanted. That's where Obsession tears apart the image of the nice guy. The real horror isn't just the supernatural curse, but the way Bear places his own desires above another person's freedom. The more Nikki loses her identity, the harder it becomes to defend his actions. Even when Nikki briefly regains her consciousness and begs to die, Bear gets offended that she would rather die than stay with him. What an idiot. And that makes the reveal even more uncomfortable. Bear was never the good guy protagonist. Distorted faith. In St. Maud, Nurse Maud is a reserved, deeply religious woman who lives almost completely isolated from the rest of the world. When she begins caring for Amanda, a former dancer who is gravely ill and close to death, she believes she has received a divine mission to save not only her patient's life, but more importantly, her soul. At first, it's easy to sympathize with her. Maud seems like nothing more than a lonely young woman trying to find purpose in a life filled with guilt and regret. The problem is that as the story progresses, it becomes increasingly difficult to separate faith from obsession. The key piece of this puzzle is her past. Before calling herself Maud, she was Katie and worked in healthcare. A traumatic incident involving the death of a patient destroyed her emotional stability. From that point on, she clings to religion as a way of seeking redemption. But that search gradually spirals out of control. Her relationship with Amanda quickly turns into an obsession. Maud begins judging her patient's choices, trying to control her life, and interpreting any disagreement as a spiritual battle between good and evil. In her mind, everything makes perfect sense. For the audience, however, signs begin to appear that perhaps those supernatural experiences exist only in her perception. And then the ending arrives. Convinced that Amanda is possessed by a demon, she enters her room at night and, in the middle of a psychotic episode, begins seeing her as a monstrous creature. Believing she's performing a spiritual cleansing, Maud attacks her with a pair of scissors and kills her in her own bed. After the murder, she interprets everything as a divine mission successfully completed and heads to the beach, where she believes she will finally be rewarded by God. There, she covers her body with a flammable liquid and sets herself on fire. In Maud's vision, angelic wings emerge from her back. But the final shot of the movie reveals reality. There is no miracle at all. Only Maud dying in intense agony while the flames consume her body. So, is there any other movie that should have been on this list? If so, let us know in the comments. There are some really cool videos appearing on screen right now, so click and check them out. See you there.